Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Avoid the Void, written by SwiftHound. A large swath of our galaxy is shrouded in a truly impenetrable void. Not the void of space, no. Radiation and matter travel through that perfectly fine. In the edges of the void, the stars begin to dim. Signals weaken. Gravity can no longer be detected. Rogue planets that get too close lose their shape as they spin all their matter into space. Any and all ways of communication and signaling breaks down until only matter exists and survives in perfect darkness. Even the physical vibrations of speech in a starship become muffled, distorted. Inside ships, the lights still function, but barely. They break more often, they require more energy, and nothing ever penetrates the void enough to see what's in it. We've tried. By the stars, we've tried. We've sent beacons that used every type of radiation to try and communicate back. Their signals faded long before they should have. We've sent ships in FTL. They slowed down to the speed of light when they entered, were able to re-engage the FTL to turn back, and were lost forever, as normal thrusters could never counteract the speed of light. We've used FTL communications, like travel. The signals malfunctioned at the very edge of the void. Most normal ships only make it for a week before succumbing to fear and turning back, seeing nothing, hearing nothing, and knowing nothing. The furthest information we have are from the probes designed to shoot pictures back to us with its cannons. They only show perfect black for at least 16.161616 light years. That's the furthest the oldest drone has gone since launching. I went on an expedition into the void. Even before the void's effects began, I felt fear. It was the exact same feeling I had when night fell on my home while I was still outside. Looking backwards, I could see all the stars in the sky shining brightly as they were supposed to. Looking forward, there was nothing. Not a single speck of matter that refracted the lights of the many research stations. The edge of the void was irregular and in constant shift, bubbling and sloshing. It slowly expanded and retracted, sometimes seemingly striking at suns that had gotten too close. The effects started only a couple million kilometers before the void became impenetrable. Our ship was the fastest ever intentionally sent towards the void, practically guaranteeing that we'd be inside the void for at least 4 months before our ship's thrust could get us back. They'd made us sign agreements before letting us experience the fear. All of us were foolhardy, and only now were we even beginning to regret our choices. What most ships experienced in hours, we experienced in seconds. The view of the windows, the information on the scanners, and our own weight on the ship's floor disappeared from detection in the time between blinks. I suppose this was better. We couldn't get afraid of what was coming before we were already completely submerged. The lights required as much power as an artificial gravity had before to illuminate the hulls of the ship like before. I guess I saved the energy in the void. Normal duties on the ship were mostly relaxed and shifts were shorter. Our reactor worked normally as the void's vibration muffling effect took hold. Maintenance was still taken care of, but it was massively reduced. We had gathered speed before entering, so all our thrusters were off. When I woke up in the middle of sleeping, I sometimes forgot I was on a spaceship at all. It all felt as if there was nothing separating me from the void around us. The first few days went by without anyone complaining. We had extensive entertainment aboard to keep the entire crew happy. Everything we heard on the ship was through electrical sound amplifiers in our heads. Everyone was instructed to never mention the void or its effects. Effectively, our entire plan was to purposely blind and deafen ourselves from any of the void's attempts at our sanity. It worked, for the most part. But the Void didn't have to act fast. It only had to wait for a single individual to break under the stress. To our misfortune, our captain was the one to break first. Though she lasted 2 months, she had been assigned to the ship, not chosen to be on the ship. She never wanted to get this far. She had been softly forced by her family and the promise of glory. If only she had at least turned the ship back around before throwing herself through an airlock. We were left floating in an inert ship that would not take our commands. The captain had locked it all before leaving us. We saw as our captain's visage dimmed as her body got further and further from the ship on scanners. It couldn't have been more than 100 meters before nothing could detect her. Everyone got on as best as they could, clinging on to the hope that the engineers could open up the consoles and let us go home. Their work was slow, however. They could not trip any of the tampering alarms, or they'd risk jettisoning the very thrusters that could lead us to the light. 5 entire years went by as we got more or less used to the idea of never going back. Well, the ones who hadn't joined the captain were used to it. 12 of us, from the original crew of 231, were all that was left. I suppose the careful vetting of the participants truly was done well, considering none of the ones left were going more insane. The last crewmate's departure was 3 years ago. With as few people, maintenance became less and less important. Most of the ship was permanently locked up and unpowered. Most of the survivors were engineers. They used recreational drugs, talked about ship systems, the video games they played, and who had banged who. The 3 data analysts, myself included, often joined in on the drugs and video games, but the ship systems conversations terrified us. We still had 99% of our energy storage remaining, which was good. What wasn't good was that the navigation system had malfunctioned, and we no longer knew which way our ship was facing. This pretty much sealed our fates to die on the ship, alone in the void. It wasn't much of a shock, not after so long. Most of us had even ditched the electrical audio amplification and simply lived with having to talk a little closer and a little louder than before. It was the retirement many of us had hoped for, in a pretty fecked-up way. There was romance, there was drama, there was comedy, and there was an unbreakable camaraderie between all of us still alive and kicking. The room for remembering the dead wasn't visited much. The engineers had hit a wall in their attempts to overriding the thrusters and resigned themselves to keeping us comfortable. I used a lot of my free time staring out the window on the bridge, hoping that my eyes could spot something the scanners hadn't. It was an illusion on my part, of course, but none of us had made it this far by being sane. We just stopped getting worse over time. A few of us had actually recovered from the worst effects. Not me, though. I kept staring at the black. After a while, I turned the bridge lights off and just stared for hours while listening to music. 7 years had gone by, and we had traveled at a constant quarter C for it all. Under 2 light years traveled, nowhere even close to what was the furthest we knew the void extended to. I slept on the bridge now, going to sleep while staring outwards. I still socialized and enjoyed the company of my friends, but not as much. I began dreaming of creatures in the void, long white spires of metal piercing the void and parting it from their path. I screamed for their aid, banged the glass that I'd been looking through all this time. My hands hurt from the impacts. I cried as I noticed the pain. My friends could not hear me through the void's muffling, even in my dream. The pain in my hands reverberated through my psyche. I realized this was no dream. It took a while for me to notice the communication station lights coming online, having been roused from their long slumber by something. I floated towards the console and assumed my practiced task, though it took a good while to remember. I woke up the ship's computers to begin passing the message being received. "My, have you come so far in this space?" A translated speech echoed in the empty bridge. a cadence shifted melodically through a small range. It was the first voice I'd heard in years. It was pleasant. I tried to speak up, but just a croak came out of my mouth. I realized it had been a few days since I'd last spoken. I tried again. We lost our captain. She went mad, locked the ship, went out. I kept staring out at the white spire, the only thing I'd ever seen outside these windows. It had no flaws that I could detect. Why did you come at all? The same voice asked. Its voice became softer, and the cadence varied more. Research. We don't know what this area of space is. We want to know. Curiosity, the oldest enemy of any cat, we understand. In a way, it is why this area exists at all. You are not the first we found here, but we wish that you might be the last. We will help you drop your ship outside the boundary, but you must deliver an explanation and a message in return. I was offered what we'd been hoping for, on a platter of platinum no less. I became worried about the message. I did not respond in time, and the voice began talking. The zone is the lingering aftermath of a weapon, if you can even call it that. It was meant to take energy from nothing and store it until the targeted reality string snapped. We expected a small, localized twist in the fabric of reality, one that would shut itself into a black hole. We found out that space was much more tightly wound than expected. One string snapping turned into 10. It began to cascade. False vacuum decay was the theory's name at the time. It wasn't correct about most things, but it got the rapid expansion right. Most things caught in the area were fine, however, not reduced to energy like we'd feared. But the vibrations of strings were greatly disturbed. They could no longer transmit the song of existence for infinite distances. The great strings were no more than shreds, individually capable, but unable to cooperate. We now know that our reality is just one possible form of energy to coalesce into distinct forms. We know that there exists 1 trillion systems for a matter to exist. We had broken the barrier of sorts, allowing the nearest dimension entry into ours. It took us over 10,000 years to reinforce the boundary you know of, and we'd barely managed even then. This area was a start and an end, but you'd never reach the end. The deeper one travels, the less the strings coalesce naturally. We are currently still in the very outer edges of it all, similar to a planetary crust. The mantle and the core are places you must avoid. There be dragons, so to speak. Whatever we caused, it allowed for creatures of the dark to enter. We don't fight them. We only drive them in circles around the darkest pits of this place. We try to keep them far, far away from true reality, where they would likely start feasting by consuming the spaghetti that is reality, with suns and plains being meatballs in the mix. They are clever. They follow the tracks of their prey comes and goes with. You have left them with nothing but straight lines to follow your tracks with. Avoid the void. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps. Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnold, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Light Jock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Asrigal. Thank you very much.